Welcome to Driven, the Unscripted Success podcast, with your hosts, Mike Menino and Nariman Hamden, bringing you insights and stories on achieving personal, professional, and financial success.
Hey guys, I'm Nariman Hamden, and this is Driven Unscripted Success podcast. We have another awesome guest for you today. We have Tim Love. Tim Love is an experienced executive consultant with a demonstrated history of success in global marketing and advertising industry. He is skilled in marketing management, integrated marketing, advertising, and relationship enhancement. He is a strong consulting professional with a Master's of Science from the University of Illinois and a BA in Fine Arts at Miami University. During his 42-year career in advertising, he built relationships of trust with many of the world's top companies, such as P&G, Mars, J&J, Nissan, Infinity Motors, Kraft, UBS, Philips, Pepsi-Cola. I could go on and on. He's also an author, and he's also a fellow podcaster. So he is the host of Discovering Truth. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, boy, you've got quite the career lineup there, huh?
I was busy.
Just a little.
Yeah.
So why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about what you do and how you got to where you are?
Well, I officially retired in 2013, but that didn't take so well. I've been doing some consulting, and I've been involved in some boards since then, primarily around the advertising industry role in the internet and some of the challenges that are coming out now about internet content and internet audience data. But when I retired, I was vice chairman of Omnicom Group, which is the largest marketing services company in the United States, and it has many famous brands like Doyle Dane and Bernbach and BBDO and Fleischmann Hillard and others that some of your listeners may remember or recall. And I also spent 25 years working with those clients that you mentioned, helping them expand their reach globally. I lived in Brussels for 6 years, then came back to New York for 3 years. Then I moved to Japan, Tokyo for 2 years, came back to New York. And then after about three more years in New York, I moved to Singapore, where I was CEO of Omnicom's Asia, Pacific, India, Middle East, and Africa business, about 70% of the world's population. And it was a lot of travel.
Yeah,
But I really
I'd say
enjoyed it.
so.
I enjoyed my career, and advertising's a really great industry if you're curious,
Oh,
because
for
you're going to
sure.
run into a lot of interesting insights, cultural and otherwise, and I enjoyed it.
I'm very creative as well.
Well, I do some art still. I haven't done much in the last 3 months, but I usually enter the Pelican Bay show down in Naples, Florida, and I sold a painting a year ago that is actually printed on the inside of my book. My book is on Amazon.com. It's called Discovering Truth: How to Navigate Between Fact and Fiction in an Overwhelming Social Media World. And it actually started with a lecture I gave at Ave Maria in Naples, where they were going to launch a marketing communications curricula, and asked me if I would do kind of an inaugural lecture for that day. And that was in 2017. So it's been a long journey, and it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it.
That's
Still
wonderful.
searching for truth.
Yeah, I bet, especially in today's day and age, huh?
Yeah, it gets more relevant every day.
Yeah. So when you think back, are there any moments that you'd say really changed the game for your career?
Yeah, I guess one of which was the first assignment I was given on Procter and Gamble. My boss was on Thrill dishwashing liquid, and I had been at the agency for about a week, and he said, "Listen, we want you to take take the product home and do some demonstrations and come up with visualizations that can show consumers how effective the new Thrill product is."
Sure.
So I loved that. I mean, it was like, I could experiment like a laboratory guy. So I went home and I tried all kinds of demos. I ended up with 30 different visuals, and
Wow.
I drew them out. And then I went back to the agency the next week, and we videotaped each of those demonstrations. Now, some of them weren't very impactful, but one I can tell you about that you can visualize just from my saying it is in seventh grade science class. I remembered my teacher taught us what surface tension is on water, and she took a bowl of water and she took little flecks of like confetti or little pieces of paper and floated them on top of water. And then she took soap and dropped the soap on the water, which released the surface tension, and all those particles went to the edge of the bowl. It was like magic.
Yeah.
And I thought that would make a good visual for the new Thrill product. And unfortunately, it was so good that Dawn ended up using it,
Oh,
which was
really?
also Procter and Gamble. And you've seen the Dawn visual for years. It says Dawn takes grease out of your way.
Yeah, sure.
I'll go back to but I really enjoyed, excuse me, doing those demonstrations, and I really got to know the product. The people at the agency really got to know me. Thought I was a little crazy with some of the things I did, and then my boss liked what I did so much. He said, "Why don't you edit the top 10, and we'll go out to Cincinnati, and you can send them to Procter and Gamble." So that was a big deal to go
That's
to
really
Procter and
impressive.
Gamble and present my ideas. And I guess the thing I learned from that is you can't fake your enthusiasm about looking at something. And I think my enthusiasm for the new Thrill product impressed everybody, including the client. And one demonstration was I took a beaker of like Crisco shortening, and I
Sure.
put Thrill on top of it, a little drop of it, and I put it on a video camera for 24 hours, and nothing happened. So that I
What did
call,
you expect to happen?
well, I thought maybe it might eat away, or the soap might do something to the shortening, but without water and without agitation, it just sat there. But
Just sat there.
we call that the grease bore. And everybody got a kick out of that because I didn't just present things that I thought were great. I presented the 10 most interesting visuals. And that one was pretty interesting when they found out that I had the video on for 24 hours.
All that
So,
footage.
so that was like an early thing, and I learned a lot. And one other thing is you never know when things are going to come back to help you or hurt you.
Sure.
During my first week on the job, my boss, who was my best boss in my career, he had been a debate coach at Annapolis. And so when you got into a debate with him, it was rather interesting because he was pretty good, but he was from the Midwest like me. And he told me that a guy was coming in from Procter and Gamble the next week, and he was going to talk about things that work in advertising and things that don't work. And he invited me to go to the meeting. And I was thrilled because I thought, gosh, I've only been here a week and I'm going to learn from Procter and Gamble what works in advertising. This is the greatest thing that could ever have happened. I was beside myself. And in between the time that he told me to come, he said, well, you'll come to the meeting and you don't have to say anything because you're too new. But if you want to ask a question or you have an idea, go ahead. Don't feel bashful. So this guy named Norm Levy was coming in, and in between the time that I was invited to be at the meeting and the meeting, I could tell that our creative people in the agency weren't particularly thrilled that somebody from the client was going to come in and tell them how to do their jobs.
Sure.
And because it was Procter and Gamble, they begrudgingly came to the meeting and they were quiet the whole time. And at the end of the meeting, the room emptied like a vacuum. They were gone. And I was left with Norm Levy. And I was thrilled with everything that he had talked about. He talked about the Duncan Hines fork cut into the slice of cake and how you shoot it so that it looks moist and delicious. And I loved all that stuff. And so after we were standing there, I said, Mr. Levy, how did you get this job? I'd really like a job like that. You're studying advertising and comparing notes with the agencies. It must be fantastic. How did you get that job? He said, well, I was raised in New York City and I went to Columbia University.
Mhm.
And after Columbia, I went into the U.S. Army in the Korean War. And then he looked right at me and looked right through me. And he said, where I was a U.S. Army intelligence agent. And I said, what did you do? He said, I worked with the prisoners of war who were brainwashed. Holy cow.
Holy moly.
Oh
Yeah.
man, could I learn from him?
Yeah.
So over
Absolutely.
the next 40 years or so of my career, whenever I went to Procter and Gamble, I would stop in to see Norm because there was no business reason for me to see him. I wasn't buttering him up and I wasn't expecting favors. I was just interested in what he had to say. And he became pretty interested in what I had to say, and that was very flattering to me. I know in hindsight that during my career, he was one of the people at Procter and Gamble that said nice things about Tim Love that helped inside the company build a relationship of trust. And I didn't know that when he came in. I didn't know it until many years later. So I say to people, really treat everybody with kindness and don't forget you can learn something from everybody. You can even learn what
Absolutely.
not to do. So
Absolutely.
don't be judgmental and try and be a sponge and learn as much as you can. Now, many years later, after I started after I gave the speech at Ave Maria, somebody Procter and Gamble saw the text of my talk and sent it to a podcaster, and the podcaster asked me to do a podcast on the talk and asked me to do it with John Pepper, the former chairman of Procter and Gamble and Coca-Cola.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
it was a neat thing. And the first podcast, John had trouble with his mobile phone, so he asked me to go ahead and do it myself. He felt that I represented his comments very well. That's the introductory podcast. Then they said, would you do another one with John where John will talk about leadership? So for your listeners, I recommend the second podcast with John Pepper, who is one of the great leaders of American business in the last 50 years. A real gentleman and high ethical, principled guy. Anyhow, after the second one, the podcast guy called me and said, can you do one a week for 15 weeks before the election? And I said yes. So I've had mostly advertising and marketing professionals talking about the art and science of advertising and marketing. But I've also had the CEO of Unilever, Jane Goodall, the naturalist and primologist. And I would say, not all the podcasts are great, but there are some real gems in there. And those gems ended up being put into a book in 2023 under the same name. So when I started the podcast series after the one with John, the first thing I wanted to do was interview Norm Levy because I was concerned that I was hearing all this discussion going on in my country about fake news and that journalists were enemies of the people. And,
Sure.
and I felt that was dangerous talk for a democracy. I really did. I spent 25 years living and working across the globe. So to come back home and hear that kind of talk, it scared me. But I
Yeah.
wanted to find out about it. And I have to say that my first instinct was that there's some brainwashing happening in America.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I looked into it, and that's why I asked Norm to do the podcast. And his podcast turned out to be the first chapter of the book. And on that one, it's worth listening to. It's 24 minutes, but he studied it. He made a script. He worked hard at it. He was 80, I think 88 or 89 at the time. And basically, it's a tutorial on the subject of truth and how it interceded with economics and culture throughout
Mhm.
history. You know, we needed to have some common agreement as to weights and measures in order to have
Sure.
commerce. There were things that were necessary, and it was a very good starting point. But I couldn't get him to talk about brainwashing. It was sort of like talking to a military guy about his battles, and they didn't want to talk about them. But
Sure.
as I worked on the book over a 2-year period, Norm would send me stuff to read, and I would read it voraciously. You know, things about contagion and how viral ideas spread and all this other stuff. But the last book that he recommended to me was called Influence by Robert Cialdini, who was a professor and behavioral psychologist at Arizona State. And Cialdini, I had not read Cialdini's book. I found out that it's like a major seminal reading for sales organizations, either in real estate or Salesforce or automotive business, whatever,
Mhm.
because he studies and uses behavioral testing to come up with 7 levers of persuasion. And the levers are things that you well know that you've used, but they're not meant to be used in a Machiavellian way. So a lever could be scarcity, and scarcity would look like, gee, I know you want to buy this car, but if you don't come in Saturday with the money to buy the car, there's a lady coming in on Monday and she's coming in with cash.
Sure.
Scarcity. Scarcity's,
Mhm.
here's a coupon, good for 30% off, but it only lasts 1 week. I experienced scarcity when I worked on Charmin toilet tissue, and Johnny Carson announced there was going to be a toilet tissue shortage, and the next day we sold out across America.
I bet.
So you can understand scarcity's a very
Sure.
relevant lever. And
Sure. It creates panic.
pardon me?
It can create panic.
Sure. And I don't think it should be used for malicious or Machiavellian purposes because it's not true if it's invented.
Sure.
If it's true, it's very effective. But another one in his book was near the end of the book was called Commitment Consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And commitment consistency is the simple idea that if you've bought something already, or you've like a certain house in your real estate business, and your customer, you knew that the customer really liked a particular style house or pool or whatever, then you would say that it's probably likely that they'll stick with the same commitment of things that they like. It's not guaranteed, but it's an area that you'd want to find out what are the things that they've already committed to. And Cialdini found that when people have made a commitment to something, their first inclination is to seek information that confirms that decision, as opposed to looking for alternative information. I'll give you an example. I say you like Bic pens. They're 19 cents each. And you like the way the ink works. They're not expensive. You can leave them in the meeting that you're in and not worry about it.
Sure.
If somebody borrows it and doesn't give it back, it doesn't break your heart. So it would be unusual for you to buy a $500 ink pen.
Right.
And somebody might say, why would you do that? When you know you like Bic pens and they've been loyal to you all along. So commitment consistency is something we all have. It's some of these commitment consistencies are based on experience, things that we've already encountered, and some of them are based on our biases for ourselves. And what Cialdini then discussed on that lever was the Chinese method of brainwashing during the Korean War. And I went, holy cow, that's why Norm had me read this book. That's
There you
why
go.
he had me read the book.
Yeah.
So I called him and I said, Norm, did you have me read this book for that? And he said, well, I thought you'd find it interesting. You know, he was like the old sage with me, the old philosopher. And I said to him, you know, we've just been through COVID. And the way that the Chinese method of brainwashing worked is these guys would be beaten up all the time. And most people associate brainwashing with torture. And that's because it was aligned with torture during the Korean War. The number of, or the percentage of prisoners of war who died in captivity during the Vietnam War was 17%. The percentage of our soldiers who died in captivity during the Korean War was 43%.
Yeah.
So it was really rough. And in the middle
Yeah.
of being beat up and not knowing what time it is and not knowing anything except name, rank, and serial number, after days and days and days of this, some guy walks in and he's got khaki pants on and a golf shirt and he speaks English better than you do.
Hmm.
And he says, I'm not here to beat you up. Nothing's going to happen. I just want to talk. I want to see how you're doing. Would you like a glass of water? Would you like a cigarette? Would you
Sure.
like a stick of Wrigley's gum? I've got Wrigley's gum here. And he might ask the guy a question like, I know your country doesn't like communism and isn't a fan of Mao Zedong, who took over China. But you've been in Korea and Asia now for a couple of years. What do you think might make sense about communism for us, but not for you? And I'm
Mhm.
not looking to argue. I just thought, what have you observed? And the guy might say, well, I know you have horrible famines where people die because you don't have enough
Sure.
food. And people back in Iowa don't have any idea of the population out here. It's
No.
staggering.
Yeah.
So I guess it might make sense to have some centralized control over the food supply
Sure. So
in
let
your
me
country, but not in mine. We don't need it.
yeah. So Tim, let me ask you this. You mentioned leadership with Procter and Gamble and whatnot. I'm sure you've led plenty of teams and I'm sure they've had their challenges. So what's your leadership style, and can you give us an example of it and how it's helped you through a tough spot?
I guess it's trying to find a platform for people to think in a new, fresh way about what they're doing.
Sure.
And that comes through not demanding that they look at a new, fresh way. It's a way of sharing what you think and involving them. An example is when I went to Europe, everybody was following the mantra, think global, act local.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. And I realized after being there for a while that that was obsolete because the borders weren't there anymore. The passport
Sure.
control, the borders were gone. You could go over from Belgium to Germany in 4 hours. It was no control. And
Mm-hmm.
I said the television was going over the Berlin Wall into Eastern Europe. There were no confined areas that think global, act local assumed.
Sure.
One day I was And I had to deal with people in China, North America, South America, and trying to remember the time zones and everything was a challenge. And but I found that my boss would understand if I told him to think like the sun.
Yeah,
If you think like the sun, if the sun's up where you are, it's dark where I am.
sure. Yeah, yeah. A bit of an
And
adjustment.
also in the internet world we were emerging into in the mid 90s, think like the sun also was a reminder that we're always on.
Mm-hmm.
Can't say,
Absolutely.
well, call me tomorrow.
Yeah. So it's being out there, in Europe and Asia, when you were building your dream team out there, what's the one trait that you always look for and why?
Uh, I always looked for somebody who would enthusiastically go about their work. It always it's no fun being around people who aren't having fun.
Sure. I agree.
And if you feel that somebody's just going through the motions or whatever, it's kind of like, I don't want you to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, you should be doing something if your life that's fun. And if you can't find fun in it, then maybe that tells you something about the
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to that old saying, don't be a stick in the mud.
yes. Yes.
So, how do you encourage your team to think? How did you encourage your team to think outside the box and bring new ideas to the table? I mean, everybody's so creative,
Well,
especially
I would
advertising.
try and present my ideas and for different ways to see the world to get them to judge that, but to also think of their own analogs. And it would be my reputation was that I was a good collaborator, that people liked to be on the team with me because we had fun,
Sure.
but we also had some pretty wild ideas that were very successful. Um, and one of the first global brands I worked on was the Always feminine hygiene brand.
Sure.
And you don't walk into a meeting in Nairobi, Kenya, and start telling everybody about women's menstruation. You listen.
Right.
But I became fascinated with the subject, learned a lot about adolescent teens, both men and women, and came to the conclusion that women grow up with an advantage that men don't have.
What's that?
You learn to accept that which you cannot change
Sure.
sooner in life. Because for a guy, it's not like a broken arm. In fact, I've asked psychologists to give me an analog to what happens when a young girl has her period, and she said, there isn't anything. I said, you got to give me some. Some people think it's like shaving, and that's not it. And she
Yeah.
said, well, the only two things I can think of, this was a gynecological psychologist from Cambridge. She said, the only two things I can think of, Tim, are when you're told you can't drive anymore and when a man becomes incontinent. Both of those things are about control. And
Sure.
guys are taught from the time they're little that they can control anything. And,
Right.
and women know that they can't because something happened that they had no control over. And it wasn't that it was a bad thing, but they're much more likely to spot the need to change, the
Sure.
need to stop something. And frankly, I think it's the combination of all of us have male and female traits in us, but it's the combination of the two that's such a lovely thing in marketing and advertising. You need to have that diversity of thought and approach.
Absolutely. So that brings me to, how do you tackle learning new things, which has, similar to this, especially stuff that's way outside of your comfort zone?
Well, I'm thinking about some of the challenges I had when I started to launch brands in China and India. Uh, People don't realize is that India has 19 official languages. So if you do a commercial, you're going
Holy
to have to
moly.
do it in quite a few languages, at least three or four.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, most Americans don't realize that. The three main languages in India are English, Hindi, and Urdu, which is a Muslim Arabic derivative. But if you ask somebody from India how many languages they speak, they'll generally say three. You can try this with your friends. They'll say three. But
Hmm.
if you say to them, but you understand five. And the
Hmm.
reason they understand five is they grew up hearing all those languages and they're
Sure.
friends. So it's a very different culture, and assessing the landscape, realizing what you don't know is very important.
Right.
Realize that you walk slowly and carefully at first. You don't come in telling people what to do in a
Sure.
market that you obviously have never lived in or experienced. In China, they have over 300 different dialects. So although Mandarin is their language, their dialects within that language are very hard to understand. They have 7 different tonalities in their language.
Interesting. Hmm.
And so the challenges are, it's very humbling, and it's very good for somebody who's then going to go back to the United States and market, because it makes you more acutely sensitive about the consumer and also the people you work with.
Sure. So, the financial landscape is always evolving with new opportunities and challenges. How do you stay informed and make decisions about where to allocate resources, especially when it comes to less traditional options?
Well, I'll tell you a story. First of all, when I went over to Asia to head up Omnicom's business in that vast region, our CEO, who's an exceptional CEO and an exceptional financial person. He's got an incredible reputation. He started his career at Arthur Anderson. He, I could never even come close to him financially. I
Sure.
was an art major, so whenever I tell John Wren that, he'd say, "Well, we won't tell." But when I went over to run our Asia business, he said, "I want you to raise our profile, and I know that you're 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 okay with talking to the press, the trade press, and that's okay with me if it raises our profile." He said, "I don't like to talk to him very much." And the reason is that he gets asked questions about financial things. And in America, if you're a publicly held company, you can't just sit there and talk about financial stuff that you haven't already reported. It's like
Oh,
a dead
yeah, yeah.
okay. So, but we had a
Sure.
competitor. We had a competitor out in our field called WPP, run by a guy named Martin Sorrell. Martin Sorrell had been the head finance guy for Saatchi and Saatchi, and then he formed a holding company. And because of the British history and the history of British Empire, his British agencies were ahead of Omnicom's in Asia. There's no argument. I mean, they were there when before India it became a nation. So a lot of I knew that a lot of the writers and clients in China would say, "Well, how are you going to run our business? You just getting started. You don't have infrastructure like J. Walter Thompson or Ogilvy." And
Hmm.
I started experimenting with my answer to that before I left. And I experimented with a really good client at J&J because he asked me the question. And I said, well, it's true. They were ahead of us. But we're moving really quickly. That's why I'm going over there. It's exciting times. And their infrastructure is older than ours, but it's kind of like having old plumbing. We don't
Right.
need to set up old plumbing. We can set up the plumbing based on how you want to set up now.
Right.
So I think we're in a really good position, and I have a commitment from our CEO to do that. So it was a nice way of sidetracking the competition, and it was true. It was true.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue that came up with the journalists, since you're talking finance, is Martin Sorrell would readily talk about WPP's numbers. Oh, they love talking to Martin Sorrell because he's throwing all these numbers around and all this financial talk, you know.
Sure.
And I talk about ideas. I talk about selling lines and benefits, and I'm not a financial guy. So I knew that they were going to ask me all this stuff, and I decided that the first time I was asked that I would have an answer set up, and it happened in India. I was giving a talk at a conference with same time Martin Sorrell was there. And he was up before me, obviously, because he'd been in India for a long time. But afterwards, the journalist said, how is Omnicom doing financially? Can you tell us how how your financials are looking this quarter and what your projections are? And Martin Sorrell just talked to us, and he gave a very shiny picture of what it looks like, and we're interested in what you would say. And I said, please, I said, I am not an accountant. I was an art major.
Right.
And I want you to tell this to the other journalists that you know, because I don't want them to get upset with me. But I can't talk about that stuff because we're an American stock market company and we can't talk about it. If you want to hear
Right.
about it and you really want to talk to our CFO, I'll arrange that for you. But he's not going to tell you anything that you can't hear on the quarterly reports, which are on our website. So my advice is to go listen to them. But if you want to talk about ideas, you want to talk about people, you want to talk about what I'm learning about China, I'm happy to talk about that.
Absolutely. So, as we're wrapping up this interview, let us know, what do you have planned geez, there goes my mic. Oh, hey, stay there. Turned into my pet. It's like, hello. What do you have planned, in the next 6 to 12 months?
Okay, well, next week, I'm going to be attending, I've been asked to join a council for responsible social media. And as you know, there's a lot of challenges with social media, particularly in the arena of harm to kids.
Absolutely.
And it's growing. And I've been very outspoken about this and involved since I retired. And I think some of my former colleagues kind of just wish I'd go retire, and be quiet.
You're like, nope,
This is something important to me, and I've always been involved in the advertising industry, well-being and outlooks. I've been involved in industry associations and on boards, so I can't help it. In this one, we're talking about kids being harmed.
Yes.
And so I was asked to be on this council. The council has been invited to go to Notre Dame University on the 27th through the 29th, and they're going to have a conference on this whole arena. And I'm working very hard on some ideas. I've started a Substack that I've published some things. And last week, I took a turn off of something that Marshall McLuhan once said, and you probably don't know who Marshall McLuhan is.
I don't.
He was a sage. He was a sage in the 60s, the television era. He's the one that said that it's a global village. He coined that term. He also
Sure.
said that the medium is the message.
Mm-hmm.
That got everybody's heads turned. What is he talking about? What he was saying is that the medium that you use has an effect on you. And going back to the Chinese method of brainwashing, is they would get the prisoner to write out what he said. And over time, by writing it out, because you use more parts of your brain when you write than you do when you verbalize something like
True.
we are now,
True.
it becomes more intractable. And medium is a message, but my new twist on that is that the message is the mirror. Because in today's world, the messages that you get are designed by algorithms to go to your interests and your psychology and your mood and everything else. So
I mean, there's plenty of times. Yeah, there's plenty of times where I think of something and all of a sudden there's an ad for it. I'm like, how is that? I didn't even say it out loud. I didn't even type it anywhere. Like the AI is like mind reading me now.
Yeah.
Well, I
But
really enjoyed having.
the one little thing for you and your
Sure.
listeners is my thesis is that we are ripe for brainwashing because we're typing and texting more than verbal one-to-one. And I have loads of data that shows that 65% of our information comes from information sources, and only 35% come from conversations like this.
True. I mean,
Conversations like this are
yeah,
called
I mean,
synchronous.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the desensitize when during COVID, how they desensitized the human touch. Till
Yes.
this day, I go to church and people don't the moment, when the priest says, you know, greet your
Yeah.
neighbor and may God be with you.
Yeah.
People start going
Share
like
the
this.
peace. Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of
They're
hesitant,
not
don't
sure.
know what, and I'm just like, please be with you, or
Yeah.
God be with you, peace be with you. But
Yeah.
it has brainwashed people that the repetition of it during that time, stay away, stay away, stay away, and then you've got social media being pumped into you as you're locked down, and it's
Yes.
exactly what you're saying. So now it's like people don't know how to interact with humans.
No. And
They can interact, but virtually.
when you make a commitment by typing, your
Mhm.
tendency is to seek information that corroborates it. And
Sure.
if and the communication is asynchronous, means happens after the other. It's not like a conversation like this. So what happens is we get upset. We
Yes.
get more upset because you didn't listen. Well, you're not
Mhm.
listening. We're typing. Typing, in my theory is that the typing is very similar to writing because it uses more parts of our brain and it
Sure.
makes those ideas and those decisions more intractable. And I decided that this isn't brainwashing because we're doing it to ourselves. Brainwashing had an element of torture. What I've called this is neurodystopian conditioning. Neurodystopian conditioning. And I know that's a mouthful, but so is ALS
Sure.
when it started. And the manifestation of this you've seen, and I call it raging bull syndrome.
Yeah.
People
Yes.
get mad at each other.
Oh, I mean, they get enraged over nothing.
Yes.
Over nothing.
Yeah. So there's
And
a Substack on that I call the medium is the message or the medium is the mirror, and it says how we're progressively radicalizing ourselves by typing
absolutely, I believe that
instead of
100%.
sitting down with. Yeah, and
Well,
even Zoom, which is great. Okay.
mhm.
But it's not the same as if we were sitting there because I have these funky shoes on.
Let's have a look. Let's have a
No, no, I'm
come
kidding.
on. Come on, Mr. Artsy. Let's have a look. Oh,
Well, when I get back
absolutely.
to Naples, why don't we have coffee sometime? And
That would be wonderful. I would
yeah,
love that.
yeah.
I would love that. Well, thank
Thank
you
you
for
for your
coming
interest.
on. Yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with you. You're a great storyteller. Very knowledgeable about a lot of things as well. Oh, I think you froze up on me.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. It looked
Yep.
like it froze. The screen's been glitching out a little bit throughout the interview. Um, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you and listen to your podcast or your book or anything, or just to pick your brain, how does one connect with you?
I'll give you my email address. It's tloveideas with no period, just tloveideas@gmail.com. There's a website that hasn't been updated in a while. It's called Tim Love's World. Has my speeches and some of my lectures and some of my artwork. And then I guess the other thing would be the podcast series is on subs. It's on all Spreaker, Spotify, all the usual ones.
All the streaming
It's
lines.
it's either it's either Tim Love's Discovering Truth or Discovering Truth by Tim Love because I had to go to a different supplier at one point.
Sure. So just Google Tim Love, and what is the name of the podcast again?
Well, if you Google Tim Love,
Oh boy.
you're going to find that there's a chef Tim Love from
Oh,
Austin, Texas. And I
okay.
kind of like hiding behind him because he has to be the most vain person in the world. He's everywhere.
Oh,
And
gosh.
I like hiding behind him.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's Tim Love of advertising. That'll get it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on, and thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Driven, the Unscripted Success Podcast. Want to share your story? Apply to be a guest at drivensuccesspodcast.com/guest.